Welcome to the Healers Podcast, where we inspire and guide healers through business expansion. We give voice to incredibly abundant healers to share their stories. We dive into the quantum field to unlock the energies of conscious creation. We also develop digital tools to help you grow, which you can find on healers.com. I'm your host, Yuli, and I'm grateful you chose to join this space. Now let's go deep. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to another great episode. Today, I'm really excited about this conversation with my new guest, Jacquette Timmons, who is a financial behaviorist and coach, helping clients navigate complex financial decisions. She has worked in the investment industry for over 20 years and conducts numerous personal finance and investing workshops. She has her own insightful podcast called More Than Money, and she's the author of Financial Intimacy, How to Create a Healthy Relationship with Your Money and Your Mate. Her unique human-centered approach to financial coaching and teaching is founded in her commitment to the idea that money is never just about the numbers. It's about the emotions. She has an MBA in finance and an undergrad in marketing from a design school, a combination that helps her bring a designer's mindset to any situation. So she's definitely my kind of person because we have some similar background. And today I'm super excited to discuss the topic of money and emotions, uncover our limiting beliefs around self-worth. And my intention for this episode, I'm going to be a little selfish here today and try to uncover some of my own hidden emotions around money. I'm sure there's still plenty. We all do. But of course, I'm excited to bring your wisdom to our amazing community of healers. So please welcome Jacquette. And if you would like to set your intention as well, please go ahead.
Oh my goodness. So delighted to do so. My intention is to reduce the friction that some people have in their relationship with money. And if our conversation can move the needle a little bit to the right of less friction for folks, I will consider that a success.
I love this idea. It's a big goal, right? We have so many frictions. So it's like, why is that? Let's start from the basics. Why do you think there are so many blocks and limiting beliefs around money that people have? Why is it such a hot, controversial subject?
Primarily because people don't really, some people, I shouldn't say so blanketly people, some people don't understand that at its core, money is simply a tool, right? It's a symbol of exchange. But within that symbol is a whole bunch of stuff, right? And embedded in that are our beliefs, our behaviors, our expectations. And it is influenced by, what did you see growing up? What are the familial factors? What are the cultural factors? What about social and professional? What about big macro things that are going on, politically in the economy? All of that affects how you experience money. And I think the challenge is most people don't really hone in on the fact that they are having an experience with money. And therefore, they lose sight of the fact that they are then by default having a relationship with money. And so if you only think of it as this external thing that you are not connected to, you miss out on all the signals that can help you to see where that friction might be and where that really is telling you what it is you need to work on internally so that you can actually have a better experience with money externally.
I love that definition because basically the way you said it, money is just another tool of transformation that we humans are given, right?
Yeah. If we lived perhaps in a different society, the way in which we would get paid for our services or we would pay somebody else for their services might be a different instrument, but we would still have a relationship with that instrument.
So from your experience working with so many diverse people from all kinds of backgrounds, what do you see as the common thread of our money relationships?
Let's start with the fact that I believe, and what I've seen is that most people don't actually view themselves as having a relationship with money. So if you don't view yourself as having one, it's kind of hard to take the time to figure out what you might want to do to improve it. But let's say you now have gotten to the point where you understand that you do have a relationship with it. I think it is navigating, I'm going to use this word again, tension between the relationship that you have versus the relationship that you might want to have or that you wish you had. And so we're constantly navigating that gap between what is and what vision or idea that we have of how it is supposed to be. And oftentimes that latter part of how it is supposed to be is driven by what you see other people doing or having, or the messages that you might have received around what you should be doing or having. And so trying to navigate the broad spectrum of messages and all of these different inputs, and sometimes how that conflicts with your reality, is part of the challenge.
Yes, I'm trying to unpack that in my head. And basically what you're saying is also that it's one of those relationships that we're not necessarily being taught in school unless you go to maybe a financial school, get an MBA, which even then, I don't know, I'm not sure if they teach your relationship with money.
Yeah, you're not teaching. I have my MBA. They're not teaching you about your relationship with money. That is for sure. They are teaching you how to crunch the numbers. And I think that that is part of the really big challenge, is this idea that we've all been conditioned to really, have as our only metric of financial success is, what do the numbers look like? And I even have a signature talk that says financial success is not just about the numbers. So, it doesn't start in your wallet. It's the formal title of my talk is Financial Success Doesn't Start in Your Wallet. And I think there is this idea that if you just make sure that 2 and 2 adds up to 4, then you are all set. And that's part of the challenge with, in my opinion, the traditional approach to money that tells you all of the things that we should be doing, right? We should be spending less than we earn, saving, having minimal to no debt, investing. Those are all smart, prudent things to do. But what is missed, I think, in the conversation around all of the tactical things that you ought to do with money is the nuance, right? The nuance, which changes depending upon the context and the situation and the variables that you are weighing. And so, doing all of the quote unquote right things when everything is perfect is a heck of a lot easier to do when you might have just lost your job, or you might have just lost your biggest client, or you might have had an illness. Like, being able to do those things in different contexts, there needs to be some room for adjusting. And I think oftentimes the conversation around money is very, very rigid because it is just simply looking at the numbers, and it's not factoring in the human aspect of it, which is why I always say that I focus on the human side of money, because it is, how do you create that grace for those situations where you're not perhaps able to do the things that you want to do, you need to do, you ought to do, or do them to the degree that you want because your circumstances have changed.
Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, you start feeling like a failure, and then you fail in the traditional financial model where you're supposed to be saving, yet you're not able to. So it's kind of like snowballs, right?
Exactly. Or, I've been there, I've done it before. And I know others, sometimes you have to dip into your 401k for something. And the traditional approach would say, you are so bad, you are so wrong for doing that, but not recognizing that maybe you only did that because that was your absolute last resort. And so you did it. Like, making somebody feel guilty about that is not going to change the reality of the fact that they had to do it. And so how do you actually give them a bridge that will enable them to make peace with that, and then at the same time put themselves in a position where hopefully they don't have to do it again?
Or maybe they just were pursuing a dream, like someone I know pretty well, such as myself, that I took my 401k out to build my first business. And it was a huge risk, but it paid off. And at that time, I didn't have any commitments and I was comfortable taking that risk. It was completely calculated. I couldn't imagine myself going back to the workforce. I had a dream I had to pursue. It was a calling. And it was it was those unique circumstances that you can justify maybe taking my 401k. But yet when I tell this story to many people, I do have this kind of like shocked reaction many times. How dare, how dare I, yes, it's, every situation is unique. And I feel like just following the traditional advice is not always the road to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, my short answer to that is yes, I agree with you.
But so let's back up a little bit. So you mentioned the building relationship with money. So where do we start? And I'm sure it's not a quick like 5-step process, but can you give us, just for the taste of this podcast episode, where do you even start building a relationship with money?
Declaring what it is you want money to do for you, right? So going through a creative process of figuring out what's the vision that you have for money. So, for example, when I'm working with clients or when I'm doing a workshop or a speaking engagement, I will weave in with whatever amount of time that I have this idea of, at the end of the day, there are really 4 things that you can do with your money very broadly: earn it, save it, invest it, and spend it. And typically how we have been taught to approach those 4 domains is you take what you've earned, and from that you make decisions about saving, investing, and spending. Well, I ask people to actually think about, what is it that you want money to do for you? How much do you want to save, and why is that important in different time frames? How do you want to invest? And looking at investing through multiple dimensions, right? There's financial investing. There's social investing in terms of giving money away. There's time, there's physical, there's mental, spiritual, emotional. What are the different ways that you want to invest your money and in yourself? What's the lifestyle that you want to have? And when you start there first, it then opens you up to be able to ask yourself, well, if these are the things that I want money to do for me, what do I need to earn to make that happen? And if you happen to run a business, then the question becomes, what does my business need to generate in revenue so that it can pay me the salary in order for me to make this happen? And, one of the things that I am really on a mission of, and I try to use every platform that I am given, is a reminder to my fellow entrepreneurs of, don't give your business everything, including your financial future. And so what that means is that being intentional about your business model, your sales process, your pricing, so that yes, you are creating a business that is healthy and, profitable and cash flow positive. But included in that is, what is it that you need money to do for you personally? Because what I find, and what I have done in the past and no longer do, is that I was in this pattern of making every sacrifice possible for my business, but then putting myself in a more and more precarious situation. So the first part of it is figuring out, what is the vision? What is it that you want money to do for you personally? And from that vision, you can then focus on your strategy and your goals and your habits and the systems that will support you in making that all happen.
Now, that is so true. And do you have any practical steps, like how to approach that? Like, I'll give you one example that just kind of came to my mind as you were talking. Like, I see some of the holistic practitioner entrepreneurs. I do call them entrepreneurs because most of them have their own practice, whether you have an office actually or not, or just working online, even remotely via Zoom all day. Like, you still have your practice and it's your business. And I see some of them don't even have as much as a incorporated business or a business bank account, right? It's all kind of, it's them. It's one persona, right? That is the personality and the personal life and their practice. like, this is just one thing that came to my mind. And, I always it kind of puzzles me, right? Why wouldn't you open a business and establish it as a practice? Why wouldn't you have a separate bank account so you can separate your life? So I'm curious your point of view on that. And if you've seen that trend as well.
So the short answer to your question is yes. I think the larger point, though, is especially because when we think about the size of our companies, so much of our identities is wrapped up in our business. And so making the time to be intentional about having it be very distinct that this is my business and this is me personally is a challenge for a lot of people. Now, when I started my business, and this is going back to 1995, I was an investment manager. And so I had to have a separate business identity. I needed to have a separate, EIN number, employee identification number. I was registered with the SEC. So the structure was already in place to separate me. However, I still was the only person, right, in my business. So it was very much tied to me. And that then meant that I took everything personally. And I think that that's another challenge when it comes to not only not having the business infrastructure that separates you, but also having your identity so tied to your business, is that you take the natural things that happen within a business way more personally than you should. Does that answer your question?
Yes. No, I feel that for sure. For sure. Are there any other steps that people can take to make sure they're not only, establish the right structure into their practice, but also protect themselves from anything that might go wrong?
Well, I think one of the things that comes from, the practical side, from a structural side, is if you pay yourself and literally pay yourself through a payroll system, because what it will enable you to see very quickly and very clearly is the degree to which you are charging enough to be sustainable and profitable at a business level and at a personal level. So let's just say, for illustrative purposes, you are a therapist and you charge $220 per session. You don't get that $220, right? A certain amount of that needs to be set aside for taxes. A certain amount of that needs to be set aside for business savings. And a certain amount of that is actually what you are able to pay yourself. And then you've got operating expenses for your business. So one of the things to think about is, when you break all that down, are you okay with the number that's left over? Are you okay with the number that you're able to pay yourself? Are you okay with the number that's left over after you've paid yourself, after you've set aside an amount for savings, for taxes, and your operating expenses? And if not, that's an initial clue to you that you need to reevaluate either your price point or the number of people that you're seeing or how you structured your engagements. So the practical things always lead back to, what are some of the decisions you need to make that speak to not only your relationship with money, but the relationship that you have with your business? Because you want to make sure that more days, more weeks, more months than not, you're putting yourself in a situation where you have a healthy relationship with both your money and your business.
Oh, yes. I just took a deep breath. So you touched on one of the very important topics as you were speaking, and this relationship between yourself and your business, on a topic of charging for your services, and this whole bigger topic of self-worth, which is one of my favorite topics, especially when we talk about healers and this space. So can you give us, I mean, I don't even know where to start. It's such a big subject, but can you give us some entry point to that?
Well, let me start with saying that I really, and I know it's just a strong word, but it really is how I feel. I hate the phrase charge what you're worth. And here's why I hate it. I'm Black. My heritage is Jamaican American. I have an ancestral history where there has been a dollar amount tied to someone's humanity. So even if that is the furthest thing from someone's mind, that's all I envision and picture and hear when someone uses the frame, charge what you're worth. Even if you separate out my personal, very visceral reaction to it, it also misses the point. Because when you are charging, yes, you are charging for your expertise. You're charging for your education, both formal and informal, your experience, your judgment, your skills, your talents. You're charging for the container within which you're working with someone. And all of that is wrapped up, and it is, yes, it's connected to you, but it is not you. And so when people say charge what you're worth, I really want them to think about, I'm charging for the value that I am bringing to the table to either answer someone's question, help them address a frustration or challenge, or help them to have a goal or desire that they need some help facilitating. That is what you are charging for. It is not your worth as an individual. And I think so much in all professions, but definitely in healing professions, there's this idea of, well, if I'm not charging a certain amount, then I must not be worth it. That's wrong. And then the other thing is, I think it helps to perpetuate on the flip side, this idea that your prices always have to be accessible. No, they don't. You might have to come to some terms with yourself around what is and isn't accessible. But I always counsel people, if you want to make your services available to people who cannot purchase at your current price, you cannot do that if you are not in a healthy position yourself financially. Because otherwise, you are doing no one a service because you're not going to be able to show up and actually give your best. So those are the two reasons why I have such a really strong reaction to it. First, it has nothing to do with your identity as a person. Two, it doesn't really account for the value that you're bringing to the table. And three, it perpetuates this notion of, for some people anyway, that I need my prices to be accessible. A, why, and B, for whom, and at what cost, C.
Well, you just said so many insightful things in one short time. So I want to unpack them for a moment. And first of all, thank you for shedding the light on this topic of personal worth. Because first of all, I never looked at it the way, once you said it, it really resonated with me. And I think it actually, by separating it from your personal worth, it almost makes it easier to build relationship with, because it's not part of you. It's not part of your personality or who you are. It is the value you provide. And you said it so beautifully. I think it's a really, really deep and valid point. And I just want to kind of take a pause and just absorb it. Because, sorry, I told you it's going to be my personal healing session. So
yeah, I'm glad.
but it is so true. So that's one, and really separating the value and extracting that and trying to define what it is. And the second portion of what you said also resonates so deeply about people feeling that it needs to be accessible, because I think especially in the healing space, again, when you have this gift of being able to actually help people and a lot of people that need healing, there are often not the ones with the extra resources, to go around and try 10, 20 different alternative modalities until, they find the cure. So I think that's another level of complexity, but it's not the cause necessarily. Like you said, the cause is personal, is that feeling that because you have this gift, you have this ability, you have to make it accessible to people. And I think it's not just for healers. I think it's for anyone building a business, right? And especially people with big missions.
Yes.
I'm building a business and on a big mission to help healers. And I feel like our service needs to be accessible because I want to help many healers. And, so it's such a big, such a big question.
Oh, it really is. I always say to people, if you want to go on a really deep personal development mission, start a business
Yep.
and confront some real big money challenges and issues. And that will definitely take you on a personal development mission. But one of the things that you just said in terms of, the whole notion of accessible being a challenge for all types of businesses, especially if they have a big mission, is it reminds me of a professor from Yale. Her name is Dr. And forgive me if I mispronounce her last name, but I believe it's Wisniewski. It starts with a W. So if you were to Google Professor Amy W. from Yale, you would find the study. But she did this study in terms of how we work. And the summary of it is that if you have a job, you just show up, you do the work, and the exchange is you get paid for the time that you're there, and you just go on about your business. If you want a career, there are elements of a job that are a part of that equation, but you are also interested in and willing to do whatever is required to proceed through whatever the ladder of growth is in that company and that, educational institution and a government position, whatever. If you have a calling, though, that's where you feel really attached to the mission. You feel really attached to the work. You feel really attached to the impact of that work, and you can get lost in it. And it's the kind of thing where you often have this idea that you could do this even if you don't get paid. And oftentimes what that leads to is people undercharging because they have this idea of, I can do this even if I didn't get paid for it. So I think it is even that much more important for people that are building a business or sustaining a business that has a huge mission or in a healing profession to make sure that they are not falling into that invisible trap of, I could do this and not get paid for it.
Another deep breath. A lot of deep releases in this session. Hopefully for our listeners too. I don't want to be completely selfish, but I think you're just touching on so many deep points for many of us that are in this space. And it's just such an important conversation. So thank you for bringing it up and for voicing it and articulating it so well. So, oh gosh, where do we go from here? So what are some of the ways that you can advise for people to take a deeper look in what they do and some of the possible ways to kind of correct course maybe or realign themselves with this idea?
I think two things. One is to separate out your craft versus the business of your craft. Those are two very different things. And yet, at all times, I think they are on two different tracks, but hopefully going in the same direction that you have to be working on, right? So what are you doing to get better at your craft? Oftentimes is very different than what you might need to do to get better at the business of your craft. And recognizing that if you think about the key dimensions of the business of your craft, you're looking at your financials, you're looking at your operations, you're looking at your marketing, like how are you getting people to be aware of you, to say, hey, this is who I want to work with. And you're looking at your sales. And for me, I separate sales from revenue because I'm looking at sales through the lens of how many of one particular thing are you selling? And I'm looking at revenue as the total dollar amount. And I think oftentimes people conflate that and they do so at a disadvantage to themselves because they're not able to see what then is making up the pot that leads to the revenue. And so leaning from my days when I did manage money, I have this tendency to think of everything through the lens of a portfolio. And we never made a decision about what asset to buy or sell without considering what impact will that have on the entire portfolio. And so when you are, a healer, the presumption is you have more than one way of working with someone. So what does that look like if you were to draw a circle, have a pie? and how much of those different ways of working with people, how much of those different ways are currently making up your pie, and how much do you need that to be in order to, again, not only fulfill the financial goals that you have for your business, but also the financial goals that you have for yourself.
Yes, that's a really beautiful exercise. And I'm not sure how many, especially solo business owners, like you just don't have that capacity or the time or even the thought of really truly analyzing your business and looking at the numbers. And, you might find out that in most cases, I think like 20% of your clients make up 80% of your revenue. And
Yep.
how do we focus on getting more of those versus all those other things that we're spinning our wheels around? But I find it also sometimes it's a matter of kind of denial. You almost like don't want to know the truth. It's kind of, a lot of people just prefer maybe, okay, things are going okay. Like I don't need to know. I don't need to understand. Why I think it's so important to really kind of like dig deeper and understand those things.
Because even if you don't like the information that you end up seeing, at the end of the day, it's insight. And with that insight, you can make better choices for yourself moving forward. And I think part of the reason that there is a denial is because there's a lot of self-judgment, right? And, a lot of self-criticism. And yeah, you might need to do some things differently. You might need to work on, something. Maybe it is telling you need to do something that you haven't done before. You need to improve something. But if you don't face the numbers, you lose out at the end of the day. You lose out on what that feedback is that those numbers are giving you. And so even though, I focus on getting people to pay attention to their relationship with money, I never negate the power of the numbers themselves. It's just don't just focus on the numbers is my whole thing. And there's a lot of insight that you can get if you are in conversation. Again, it's just like any other relationship that you have when you are communicating and you're really hearing one another. The relationship tends to be a little stronger and a little better.
All right. So it's like a daily wallet conversations.
A daily, a weekly, some sort of frequent conversation. Because look, I think money is always giving you feedback. It is always telling you, yes, do more of this or do less of this. And this is how you can get me to work with you or work for you. And I think that becomes really, really important if you go through a dry season, because there is not one business, I don't care what the size of the business is, that doesn't have a cyclicality to it, right? And so every business has a season, and you tend to learn more about your relationship with money when you are going through a very lean season. But that's giving you feedback because it's telling you, okay, I did X, here's the result. I don't quite like this result. So maybe I need to reverse engineer. How did I get here? What were some of the choices that I made? But again, not with any judgment, but what were some of the choices that I made? And what might I need to do differently moving forward so that I don't have, I'll have a different result, but I don't want to have a repeat of this result because I didn't like it. That's one thing. Another thing that just came to mind that I really want to make sure to point out is that I think we need to really also be mindful of the fact that with every new level of financial success, typically comes the need for your roles and your responsibilities to change in some capacity, financially, emotionally, and maybe even spiritually. And I think sometimes we're not prepared for those changes. It's almost like the stress. I call it the stress of success. I think the more formal term for it is success anxiety. But I think that oftentimes getting what you want, hitting that financial goal, getting to that ideal number of clients, all the things that you've been striving for, once you get to it, people don't realize that now that you are in new territory, there might be some things that you need to do differently in order to take you to the next milestone of your goals. And I don't know that people are always prepared for the weirdness that can sometimes come with getting what you want.
I love that. I mean, we're so focused on getting where we want, but no one talks about it that, that's not like the top is the end of the journey, right? It's
Right.
just another milestone, and there's more to climb.
Yep.
If you want to. I mean, you can always just stay there and
Yeah.
do it.
You get to choose what enough is for you, right? Like I never aim to define that for someone, but no matter whether you choose to stay or you choose to grow, there are choices that you are making in either of those scenarios.
I'm curious to hear your spiritual perspective on money.
Oh my God. I don't know how it can be anything other than. And for me, the way I'm defining spiritual is that A, there's something bigger than you at play. And then B, that there is a lesson beyond the dollars and the cents. And so that's how I'm defining it. And I think that we get closer to understanding a little bit more about our spiritual relationship with money when things are challenging, when they're not going as well as we want, because that's probably when we pay attention. Otherwise, things are going groovy and we're like, woo, yeah. But when they're not going groovy, you got to rely on different things, right? You have to either rely or you need to come into relationship with an inner aspect of yourself that maybe you haven't before or you haven't cultivated and it needs to be cultivated. Or maybe there's a trust issue. Maybe there's a self-trust issue that is happening that can only be highlighted when you are in the midst of a challenge. Maybe it is, a tap on the shoulder that says, you've been doing A, B, C, or D, and that's helped you to get here, but that's not going to help you to move forward. And what I'm trying to get you to do, that I'm trying is the spiritual part. I'm trying to get you to prepare for that. And I need you to change some things. That might be your mindset. That might be the behaviors that you're practicing. That might be the systems that you have in place. I need you to get ready. So to me, the spiritual part is both, there's something bigger. It is something that is tapping you on your shoulder to say, I need you to pay attention to this. Because if you don't, you're not going to be prepared for what comes next.
Oh, another deep breath. I love this so much. It was so insightful for me, this session, and just full of wisdom. And I would love to learn a little more how you got to this place. How did you achieve this milestone of being such an incredibly successful, not just professional, but someone who combines like so many complex topics into an emotionally charged topics in such a profound way that it is actually helping and transforming people. So I know the story is long, but if you can share it in just a few minutes, I think it will be super helpful to see your journey.
Yeah, well, clearly it was not intentional because as most things, it came the hard way. Look, I am probably like a lot of the listeners that are tuning in that I grew up in a financially normal household, right? We weren't poor, we weren't working poor, but we also weren't rich or wealthy, right? So I guess right in the middle. And I had this idea that, if you were wealthy, that shielded you from a lot of things. It shielded you from mistakes, from being in debt, from losing money, etc. And I graduated and I saw the stock market crash a year after graduating undergrad. And I had a chance to see up close and personal two very dramatically different reactions to it. People that were calm and other people that if they could have, they would have jumped out of a window. And I was fascinated because I'm like, well, what's going on? One thing happened. Why are there these two very distinct reactions? A, and why are they not talking to one another? B is I worked in the private bank. And so I had a chance to see folks with some uber wealth and to recognize that, oh, they have the same questions that my mother had, because I grew up in a single parent household. They have the same questions that my mother had. They had the same kinds of challenges. They just had different degrees of resources to work with, to deal with those questions and those challenges. And then fast forward to when I started my own business, probably about 6 years or so into it, maybe a little bit longer. My CPA at the time said to me, when are you going to stop mortgaging your life? And that took the wind out of my sails, because he was like, look, you cannot keep doing what you're doing. And what I was doing was continuing to dip into my savings, continuing to sell some of my investments to keep my business afloat, all of which, by the way, was the exact opposite of what I had been taught personally by my mother in terms of saving and not having debt, and taught academically and taught by my profession. And I had to have a real come to Jesus moment of recognizing that I was putting my personal financial health at risk because I really wanted this business to survive. And while I did want my business to survive, I had to figure out how to do it differently. And so I made the decision to borrow money, which was it was so hard for me to do. But I borrowed money from my mother and from some family friends. And I went into debt, which I didn't have other than my student loan, when I started my business. I went and got a part-time job, and all of that eventually helped me to crawl my way out. But a lot of what I've experienced is also what I have seen other people in terms of my coaching clients experience. And so a lot of that wisdom is a combination of, oh, I've been there. I know what it feels like. I know what that transition feels like and what that looks like, or at least what it looked and felt like for me. And I've helped other people navigate similar experiences, even if they're not quote unquote dire. They're not what people wanted, and they wanted something different. And I've helped them to navigate that. So that's where a lot of that wisdom comes from. Firsthand experience and firsthand observation.
That is an incredible story. Well, thank you so much. You're such an inspiration and full of wisdom. I would love to have you again anytime.
I would love to come back anytime.
I just love this conversation so much. Thank you. And I'm sure you helped a lot of our listeners to unpack some of their relationship with money. So thank you again.
You are so welcome. So welcome. And if I can just, before we wrap, just make a suggestion. And when people think about their relationship with money, think of it through the lens of, if I had $1, what would I do with that dollar? And going back to the example that we started off in the beginning in terms of the 4 things that you do with your money, would you save it, some or all of it, invest some or all of it, spend some or all of it, or keep it? And there's no right or wrong answer. But if you think of that question and your answer to it, and then you were to ask somebody else, that's where your relationship with money comes into play, because more than likely you would have done things differently. And even if you chose the same thing, your why behind it would have been differently. And that's how you can really tap into the relationship aspect of your money.
Love this so much. All right. I'm doing my dollar exercise right now. Hopefully it's more than $1. I like to think, why would I do it $1 million?
Well, one of the reasons why I intentionally use $1 is because some people do believe that if the example is a higher dollar amount than $1, that they would do something differently. And my experience has been, and my observation has been, you will do with more what you do with what you have right now. You're not going to automatically, do something differently if it's $1 million, simply because it's $1 million, if you're not already doing that with what you have right now. So that's why I purposefully use $1 as the example.
Very solid. I love it. All right. $1.
Yes.
Got it. Oh, thank you. Such a treat.
Thank you.